I can't show you that much of this game. There's a reason for that, and to avoid being punished by the powers that be, I'm going to have to talk around it a little bit, but I wanted to anyway because this title, Fear and Hunger, is one that really took me by surprise in terms of the way it goes about handling a lot of kind of old school RPG trappings and stylings. So we're going to talk about it, but in a roundabout kind of way and with a lot of blocked out imagery when I need to try and emphasize a point but can't show you the thing that we're talking about. So content warning, I guess, but there's not really going to be any directly shown or spoken about things. So you've been warned, I guess, but let's talk about it. Hello everyone, my name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and this one is a little bit out there, not in my normal wheelhouse of things that we discuss on the channel, but it's of interest to me, so I wanted to talk about it. What is Fear and Hunger? Well, Fear and Hunger is a indie game that's, I think, made in RPG Maker. I'm not 100% sure, but it's an indie title that was first brought to my attention by my partner, Jane, when she asked me if I'd ever heard of it. And when I said no, she said that she thinks I would find it interesting because it's kind of like a mix of Berserk, Final Fantasy, and Undertale. And that's not a combination of things that I've ever seen put together before, really. Berserk and Final Fantasy maybe, but tossing Undertale in the mix there, that was interesting. So I knew I immediately needed to check it out. I looked it up on Steam, and she told me, well, make sure that it's not the censored version if you get it on Steam, because there's a censored version. Okay. Why is there a censored version? She's like, well, you have to play it and find out, and I want to hang out and watch because it's an interesting game. Like, all right, I can do this thing. So I started to look into it, and yeah, I understand why there was concerns over it being censored. Now, what I learned is that the game is not actually censored on Steam, and apparently that is a rumor that the devs themselves, Happy Paintings, don't even know how it started, but the full release on Steam is the full uncensored version of the game. And yeah, boy howdy, this is a game that absolutely is an adults-only game. You can, I guess, let your imagination run wild a little bit with what that entails, but this is a dark, literally like visually dark and obviously thematically dark dungeon crawling RPG that I immediately fell in love with. I mean, you can even see based off of like the cover art and some of the in-game art and everything where the idea that this is very Berserk-like comes from. There's a lot of Berserk-like themes, both in the horrors of humanity and the things that we do to each other and the things that damaged, broken, twisted people are capable of, which are in so many ways greater and more terrible than all of the monsters we can imagine that we populate our fantasy worlds with. And it puts you right in a world like that, alongside a bunch of those fantasy monsters that are also capable of just as terrible things, and says have at and survive. So you start the game, you make a character, you get a little bit of opening narration. I played the knight for the time that I've spent playing the game, and you get some choices that determine what your starting equipment is going to be, your abilities, all that type of fun stuff, and you get dropped in front of the dungeon. And when they say that this game is hard, they let you choose your difficulty options. Fear and Hunger is like the base difficulty option, and it only gets worse from there. Terror and Starvation, I believe, is the next difficulty level up, and it just gets worse. And it makes sense, because literally you start the game, you explore a little bit, start to figure out the controls, and you get set upon by a pack of dogs that will immediately tear you limb from limb and give you a game over. And you have to restart. And that was my introduction to the game. And it set the tone really well for what I was going to be experiencing later on. So you go into the dungeon, and the key things that you need to understand here are that the game tells you nothing. There's a very much Souls-like experience that I had with this, where you'll start seeing status effects and things happening in combat and just the way combat itself works. And you just have to figure it out. You just have to figure it out. What does that symbol on your character's menu mean? That seems like it's either some sort of a worm or a thorn or something. Well, it turns out that you have some sort of a disease and you need to eat a food or consume a potion that will cleanse you of that disease. You have a little blood symbol that appears after you got sliced or bit or something like that. Well, the game won't tell you this, but if you use a bandage, it goes away and you stop bleeding out as you run around the dungeon. Cool. Awesome. You suffer a particularly serious wound and find yourself no longer mobile, shall we say, because of a disassociation of certain variously important ambulatory limbs. Well, better cauterize it, I guess, as you then crawl around the dungeon and continue to try to make progress to achieve whatever goal it is that your particular character has here. It's pretty brutal. It's pretty nasty, and this is accompanied by just the dark, dingy, oppressive, spooky atmosphere that this place has. There's weird monsters moving in the dark that will do terrible things to you, and you just have to figure out how to deal with it. Like, you can't just mash attack to win in a fight. You actually have to disable your opponent's limbs to make them easier to hit so you can get the kill shot. Like, there's a lot of learning to be done, but what I found is that as you proceed, there's a certain satisfactory element to the progression of the game. Once you figure out, oh, I need to make sure that I have X amount of food, because your character does get hungry and does get weaker over time as a result, thus the name. You need to have food that is safe to consume, that you prepare to be able to continue to push forward into the dungeon. You have to find safe places to sleep, so that way you can save your game, rejuvenate yourself a little bit, keep pushing forward. You need to learn how each enemy deals with you and how you can deal with them. And you need to realize that sometimes violence is not the answer, and you do actually need to talk your way out of situations, which is why I think Jane kind of brought up the idea that there's an Undertale element to this game. Not everything needs to be fought. A lot of things do, and a lot of things will not care about your efforts to communicate with them, like the guards. We'll get to them in a minute. But there are definitely times where you might find an injured knight, and rather than fighting him, you need to talk with him, and he can give you some insight into what's going on in the dungeon, how you might be able to survive going forward, give you some warnings about some things that you can run into. And you need to pay attention to your surroundings if you want to survive. You can't just plow forward like in an old school RPG and just deal with whatever comes your way because you've got a small alchemist shop worth of potions and an army of white mages in your pocket to heal you up. Healing is extremely scarce. Wounds are serious and take time to heal, and like realistically take a while to heal. And if you're not paying attention when you turn a corner, you could step into a trap or get ambushed by a monster that will absolutely eviscerate you or worse. So, I found it very compelling. As a fan of difficult games, of games that make you learn and pay attention, and as a fan of very dark fantasy, everything about this game spoke to me. And then I made it to the dungeons. And the dungeons are where you encounter the guards. And I cannot show you the lower extremities of these enemies for reasons that will hopefully be evident as I try to describe them. But they are large, humanoid-esque figures, muscular, armed with weaponry, kind of ogre or orcish, as you might expect. But they have a unique aspect to their anatomy that the game calls a stinger. And I think that's a fair and safe way to describe it, if you catch my drift. Now, notably, this is a very large stinger, and it is described in a way that immediately will put you on edge as soon as you enter the fight. Again, I don't know. So, like, you know how you get a throbbing headache? That's the word That is a word that I would use to describe this stinger. I don't know if I'm gonna get demonetized for this. We're gonna find out. And I was fortunate enough to never find out what happens if you don't deal with this, because, well, you can target individual body parts in Fear and Hunger to disable them for strategic purposes. You know, you can target your opponent's leg to make them slower, to make them easier to hit. You can target their arm to maybe disable their ability to use their mace or their shield or whatever. Kind of standard stuff. You know, you see stuff like that even in Fallout with the VATS system and what have you. But this is a large enough body part that it has its own targeting. And I took advantage of that at the beginning of every fight to ensure that whatever it was going to do, it would no longer be an issue. And I intend to keep it that way if at all possible. But I have a distinct feeling that I know exactly what it would entail, and it would be very bad for my character and for my mental health, probably. So I didn't have to deal with that. But what I did find is that there are other ways that the guards can commit atrocities against you. At one point, I lost a battle to one, and I was expecting to just lose the game, as I had died previously and had to restart, as one does in a video game. But then I didn't restart. The screen went to black, and then I was crawling through a tunnel that wasn't made of rock, but was made of other material that, again, you can probably imagine, don't really want to show because, again, YouTube likes what it likes and dislikes what it dislikes. But I then proceeded to pull my way out of this tunnel and found myself in a corridor constructed of similar material that was wet and squishy. And then I realized that my character wasn't standing up. She was continuing to crawl. Because, well, she was a shorter person than me. Perhaps she once was when we first came into the dungeon. Make of that what you will. And again, I then proceeded to crawl around and continue my adventure. And there was no, like, oh, well, this is, you know, it's just kind of like a gruesome, like, scene like you get in video games. Nope, the game just continued. And I just had to make do. And I eventually lost, as one might imagine. And then I had to reload. I was like, okay, that's interesting. Other times, I would just lose and black screen, reload, save, okay. But then again, I lost to a guard, a bigger, more armored guard this time, who I was not adept to deal with. And I woke up in a prison cell. And again, I was left to try to crawl away as this guard essentially just toyed with its food until I didn't have enough constitution of mental capacity due to extreme blunt forces that allowed me to air my mind out to the world in a way that wasn't exactly good for my health. Then came to a black screen and reload. So I hope this is giving you an idea of what this game is like and why it's so brutal but compelling and interesting. I haven't had the chance to play that much more of it. I noodled around a bit, took some different paths because you can choose wherever you want to go. It's not a linear experience at all. And I was exploring bookshelves and navigating traps and getting way better at the game, finding cooking recipes and little bits of lore and characters discussing why this dungeon was so malevolent in its just atmosphere and the creatures within it. And then I even found a new party member, a little girl who was locked in a cage by a group of cultists. And I found a key and got her out, and she joined my party. And that was awesome. She couldn't do anything because she's a 6-year-old wearing like a potato sack. But she was there. Where would that lead? I don't know, but I'm sure it'd be something interesting. And there's just an air of mystery around this game that is so compelling because it's so different and so not afraid of being its own experience compared to so many games that are out on the market today. It definitely feels like something that would have come out in the late 90s, early 2000s, if not even later, honestly, maybe early 90s, late 80s. And it's interesting. It's very, very interesting. There's a lot that I want to see in it. I definitely want to experience the full breadth of what it has available. And there is actually even a sequel. There's a Fear and Hunger 2, which I didn't realize. So obviously the game did well enough and has enough of a cult following that the developers decided to make another one, which is awesome. But it's a piece of media that stands nearly alone in the way that it makes me feel. It's not an issue of disgust or abject horror or revulsion. And that might be the feeling that it elicits in a lot of people. But because I very much enjoy very dark, very adult, especially fantasy, literature, movies, shows, games, it doesn't affect me in that way, but it gives me the same feeling of desperate human struggle against horrifying, incomprehensible forces that Berserk does. And I'm sure that's where Jane got the second half of this statement, that it's a mix between Berserk and Undertale. And like the Final Fantasy, I think, comes in largely from the turn-based gameplay, but this is a game that if it wasn't directly inspired by Berserk, I would be shocked. The art style is so similar. The simple, bald-faced savagery of combat and survival in a supernaturally aggressive dungeon. It reminded me of the scene in Berserk, if you're familiar, where Guts and Griffith go and fight Zod in this decrepit, crumbling castle, this general of an enemy army who has slaughtered their troops to a man, and then is revealed to be this horrifying demon that nearly devastates these two incredibly talented, well-trained, well-coordinated soldiers, to the point that it nearly kills them both, despite their best efforts, and they're only able to drive it away when a supernatural force is revealed. And that's awesome to me, because there's a light in Berserk. The value of companionship and of understanding the goodness in humanity, and the knowledge that no matter how dark and depraved and hopeless something gets, that's not an excuse to give up. It's not a reason for you to give in to despair and let whatever dark forces at play overcome you. You have to stand. You have to fight back, whether you're alone or especially if you have people standing alongside of you who you care about and who care about you. And nothing has ever quite captured the same level of intensity of that message that Berserk does. There are definitely other games that do so. Final Fantasy Tactics, or other media really that does that. Final Fantasy Tactics, Attack on Titan, so on and so forth, capture that same feeling, but Berserk brings it to a whole nother level. And Fear and Hunger feels the same to me, which is incredibly impressive. So I'm sorry that I can't show you as much of it as I would like due to the sensitive nature of everything that's involved in it. And I do implore you to check it out for yourself if you are of age to be consuming such media, and you are not someone who would be bothered or upset or in other ways negatively impacted by the subject matter. Because this is definitely for a specific audience who are ready, willing, and able to engage with it. And it's not an indictment against anyone or a condemnation of you if you feel like you can't. Know your limits and know what you enjoy. Just because I'm recommending this and I think it's very interesting and compelling does not mean that you will feel the same way or that you should in some way act differently to how you feel about this type of thing. It's a lot. It is definitely a heavy-duty thing, so proceed with caution. But Fear and Hunger is awesome, and I absolutely intend to play more of it on my own time. I will never be able to stream this or do a full Let's Play of it or anything. I know there are people who have footage on YouTube, on probably Twitch. You can go check it out if you want. I don't know how they get away with it. I'm not risking it. But yeah, that's Fear and Hunger. It's something I've been wanting to talk about for a little while. I've had the footage recorded for a while, but I haven't had the opportunity to record the dialogue and the commentary until now. So I hope you find it interesting, and I hope that you enjoy this look into a side of gaming that doesn't get explored, in my opinion, nearly often enough, largely because there's probably not much money to be made in it because of the limited nature of being able to show it, but still. That said, I'm going to wrap this one up here, so thank you all for watching. My name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. I hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there, and remember, be good to each other. Bye now.